fizički nego kroz projekciju virtualno je Balkrishna Doshi. Nakon toga raspravili smo o drugim mogućnostima što napraviti u takvim okolnostima. Doshi je bio spreman održati i predavanje putem Skype-a, ali obzirom na tehnološka ograničenja i neizvjesnost šta se može dogoditi u takvim uvjetima i okolnostima, zaključili smo da bi možda ipak bilo najbolje da se jednostavno to predavanje snimi i da se onda reproducira. Dakle, to možda nije live, ali kao da jest live jer je zbilja pripremljeno posebno za ovu situaciju, dakle za kontekst Dana Orisa i toliko možemo sigurno smatrati da je došao praktički sa nama i da je riječ o njegovom autentičnom nastupu u sklopu Dana Orisa. I sada Pritzkerova nagrada Orista je ovoga puta otvorila još jedno novo poglavlje u dodeljivanju tih nagrada vrlo zanimljivim protagonistima. Dakle, riječ je o čovjeku koji je rođen u Indiji 1927. godine, ima odista jednu bogatu praksu, jedno bogato životno iskustvo iza sebe. Počeo studij arhitekture još 1947. godine, interesantno upravo u godini kada Indija dobiva svoju neovisnost. Počeo je studij u Mumbaju, ali vrlo brzo odlazi u London 1950. godine, gdje dolazi u kontakt sa Le Corbusierom, pa zatim prelazi u Pariz gdje radi u Le Corbusierovom uredu. Tu sam čak naišao na neku anegdotu kako je uopće došao do te pozicije toga mjesta. Le Corbusier od njega nije tražio portfolio, nego da mu rukopisom napiše svoj neki mission statement što će raditi kod njega i čini se da je temeljem ljepote rukopisa, ali isto tako ljepote tog teksta, tog iskaza uspio doći kod Le Corbusiera u vrijeme kada je u stvari taj ured bio negdje na svom vrhuncu možda svoga intenziteta. Vjerojatno treba upozoriti na činjenicu da je to ona faza Le Corbusiera kada on već prelazi u jednu više poetsku arhitekturu, dakle od one racionalnosti 20. i 30. godine. Le Corbusier tada se već dovršenjem unité de habitation okreće se istraživanju slobodnih formi, a sve više i više se okreće upravo tim nekim udaljenim kontekstima, pa je tako vrlo brzo uslijedio i njegov veliki projekt Chandigara u Indiji, gdje naravno Doshi igra vrlo važnu, čak jednu od ključnih uloga. Te interesantne suradnje nastavljaju se dalje, tako da 1962. godine Doshi surađuje sa Louis Kahnom, također na projektu Ahmedabada, to je bio Indian Institute of Management, i ta suradnja traje idućih 10 godina. Dakle, jedna vrlo interesantna kombinacija suradnje s tim velikim majstorima arhitekture, Le Corbusier kao predstavnik prve generacije tih velikih majstora, Kahn kao druga generacija koja sigurno dolazi i donosi nešto novo i specifično. Vrlo brzo Doshi osnivaju svoj vlastiti ured sa svega nekoliko ljudi koji do danas već narastao do formata da ima 5 partnera i 60 zaposlenika. Sveukupno je u tom dosta dugom vremenskom rasponu dovršio 100-tinjak realizacija. Među nekim od najznačajnijih realizacija možemo istaknuti Center for Environmental Planning and Technology. To je stvari fakultet koji je Doshi osobno osnovao u Ahmedabadu. I onda negdje bitno kasnije, recimo 89. godine, dovršava vrlo zanimljiv i prilično već i poznat projekt socijalnog stanovanja Aranja u Indoreu. Dakle, vrlo interesantan projekt koji reproducira gustoću i intenzitet tradicionalnih indijskih naselja, gdje ta moderna arhitektura se hibridizira sa lokalnim arhitektonskim i idiomima, ali isto tako i urbanističkim morfologijama. Naravno, njegov vlastiti studio, također u Ahmedabadu iz 1981. godine, gotovo pa je lekcija toga na koji način se koncepti moderne arhitekture primjenjuju u lokalnom kontekstu i kako su osjetljivi prema lokalnim datostima, naročito klimatskim posebnostima koje su naravno u Indiji specifični. Podamo nešto interesantno, meni bilo nepoznato da je od 67. do 71. bio član Team 10, dakle jedna vrlo interesantna epizoda, nije dugoročno djelovao u sklopu tog pokreta reformatorskog modernizma, svi znate naravno Erikson i Peter Smithson, Aldo van Eyck i svi ostali, ali riječ je bila o jednoj vrlo važnoj razmjeni znanja između epicentra istraživačkog pristupa arhitekturi u modernizmu i indijskog, uvjetno rečeno, perifernog konteksta. Kao što sam već spomenuo, dakle, osim svoje projektantske prakse. Doši je intenzivno involviran u edukaciju, pa tako je to i osnivanje te škole za architecture and planning u Ahmedabadu. Dugo godina Doši je bio dekan tog fakulteta, danas je dekan Emeritus. Osim Pritzkerove nagrade dobio je brojne druge nagrade, Aga Khan nagradu za arhitekturu, a uostalom služio je i u samoj Pritzkerove nagrade kao član žirija, isto tu dužnost i funkciju obnašao i u Aga Khan nagradi. Član je Royal Institute of British Architects, Indian Institute of Architects i počasni član American Institute of Architects, dakle koliko god ga možda mi nismo toliko prepoznavali do sada, apsolutno je bio akceptiran od strane tih vodećih i relevantnih međunarodnih institucija. Predavao je diljem svijeta, spomenimo samo MIT u Massachusettsu, Rice University i University of Hong Kong. Evo, Doši ne mogu pozvati na pozornicu, a mogu mu prepustiti projekcijsko platno.
First of all, let me thank you for making all the trouble to not only invite me, but to ask me to even record in absentia. My profound apologies to all of you. I would have loved to be with you, talk to you, listen to you, and perhaps travel in your wonderful historical culture. Maybe some other time. Like your country, your culture, which is an amalgamation of many civilizations, many cultures, India is also the same, except that we are several million people, much larger and much older perhaps. So your request to talk about my journey and my work and what I do and what I try to do, I will perhaps try to narrate you how things have happened. You know, when you see a country or a culture for last 60 years, when before you were called no country, then after independence you are called a developing country, then slowly you call the country which has nothing, and slowly you call third world country. And all these things are talked about because everybody generally sees how cultures happen. When you begin after a long struggle of dependence, and when you had a history, how does one really start coming back to one's own independence, the glories, and really say, no, I want to do something better? And I think that is the story of India. From large number of people, from poverty, from underdeveloped areas, from multiple languages, of not having anything, disparities between income levels, less of industrialization, today we are very different. We have changed, like you are changing. And I think in that change is where my life starts. 60 years of my practice. When I began my career, after I came back from Corbusier, the task was to find with minimum, with no technique, no technologies, scarcity of materials, economic paucity, everything was happening. And in that you have to begin architecture or just something to build for people to live and act. So it's not only talking about housing only, it's also talking about towns, cities, villages. You're talking about creating institutions. You're talking about creating some kind of understanding in people about what is the nature of what we had, what we are happy about, proud about, and what are we going to give back in return. So it's like a revolution. It's a revolution which begins with nothing, and now we are facing the challenges of the new world, the technological world. And I think this is where the whole juxtapositions have happened. And I think this is where I was trying to play my role as an architect. The first time I began was that I was not an architect. My background is very different. Several changes happened accidentally or by design. And that is like I was born into a joint family where there were 15 to 17 people, always evolving, changing, adding. The young ones and the old ones. You have somebody 80, there's somebody is only just born. And then it is not only that, but it's a society of communities. So we have our own rituals, we have our own myths, we have our own history. And therefore we are religious, we are future thinking, but we are also open-ended. So when you see these things happening, and when my grandfather had the carpenter's workshop, I even learned there that changes happen from a log to finally creation of a furniture, whether it's a cupboard or whether it's a table or anything like this. So all these things, to me suggest that there is a flux. There is a constant transformation. There is a constant construction and deconstruction. And therefore, for me, the idea of a static building has never entered. In my life, building is organic, growing, because my grandfather's house was only one story, then it became two stories, then it became staircases were added, they added walls, then there was no space, so you make a sandwich wall and put staircase there. And this is really where I grew up. So my notion of architecture, therefore, is not a theory or a building designed as a design, but to me it is like an organism, growing organism. So when there is a growing organism, it is very close to nature. Because like nature, it has its own rules and laws, but all depend upon the cosmic forces. You look at the sun, you look at the rain, you look at wind, you look at people, you look at earth, you look at the resources. And the other thing is, while you are doing this and understanding this, you also understand that nature recycles. Nature constantly goes, merges, and nature doesn't have any waste. And how did I learn this? I learned this from Corbusier. That is what is very strange. My education began with Bombay, but then I went to London, they went to Paris, but those were chances. But the real education was when I began to work with Corbusier in his atelier in Paris, and when I started reading his books and his writings. And one of the things that I found was, in his studies, nature plays a tremendous role, almost like watching a zoo. There are snakes and reptiles and cockroaches and animals and birds and water and plants and trees. Now all these things were drawn by him, and I think what he was trying to say is integration. Create integrity, and if you have integrity, life will happen. And I think that is the lesson I learned. So when I learned that, when I came back from Paris, after doing studies in social sciences, politics partly, etc., I only learned about this, that there the laws are of integration, the laws of routine, and the laws of dynamic growth. So where does architecture lie in that case? So when I began, I said, what are my resources? No finances, limited finances, very little skills which are there, native skills. So you use a brick and you start working, and if you are making an arch, you make a vault and make an arch. But you train and you learn and you acquire knowledge, but you also add another dimension to this. And while you are doing, you are thinking about privacy, you are thinking about climate, you are thinking about the use of light and ventilation and air. I had to invent a whole lot of things because everything had to be, at least windows, doors, spaces, they have to have multiple uses. And those multiple uses became for me very important. Let us say you have a window and you make a grill because you have a window there, you need a privacy, so you need a curtain. But rather doing all this, if you can make metallic lures, everything works together and you get diffuse light. So I was thinking about architecture in another way of creating elements which would be multi-purpose, multi-use and affordable. So my whole attitude to architecture has been, is it affordable, is it sustainable, is it viable for Indian conditions, and can I avoid using less of sophisticated technologies? So orientation became very important. And that's how I began my work. And I think as a result, because the clients were getting something else from the economy, they were getting more things than they had earlier in other buildings, they were very happy with it. And so every time, every project, whether it is the Indology which I did subsequently, or when I did my own house, or when I started doing the School of Architecture, my purpose was, how do I use the virtues of wasteland, how do I use the virtue of levels, how I use the virtue of people coming from far away, and then create a theatre out of this. Open-ended theatre where the students come, they can be on the lawn, they can be under the shade, they can be in the gathering, they can be on a square. So everywhere you try to create another home for them. So for me, even changing of definition was very important. The moment we call a school, we think about order, we think about relation with teacher, etc. But the moment we talk about home, I think that home is completely different. Informality comes in, joy comes in, lingering comes in, and slowly absorbing comes in. So what I found was, when you start absorbing, memories come back. Your childhood comes back. Your awareness of childhood comes back. And that is really the story about what I have done so far. And in all of these, I was looking at communities, I was looking at social structure, I was looking for their employment, their earning, as well as what would happen to them as future. There were many instances that happened. For example, when I was in my grandfather's shop, a woman of a carpenter's wife came in and she was crying because she was robbed of her jewelry and she was howling. My grandfather asked, and then she said that my husband had gone to drink a local liquor and then he took my jewelry. And I was so shocked that I went the next morning with my friend to the house of the lady and I saw there was nothing. That was the time I took a vow that I should do work for the poorest of the poor. Even in the furniture business, which was the carpenter's business of my grandfather, I thought I'll try to make economical things. So my tendency has been to create comprehensive architecture of buildings which have the adaptability to accept situations, allow the inhabitants to really get what they would like to have, so that they also have a choice. Then the neighborlyhood of the society which our traditions have, in which you create not only courtyard, you create cross ventilation, you create the use of terraces. So everything was multiple use, using less of mechanical equipment and creating another social order in which time and energy also are saved. So I had the chance, lot of chances to do buildings. I did townships. Luckily, I had the chance after a few houses. I did the township first for the fertilizer, then I did for the atomic energy company, then I did for the other people. So when I did these 4, 5, 6 townships, I found there were hierarchies. The government built hierarchies, and I did not like hierarchies because hierarchy means that you create conflict and you create this. So in that case, I said, is it possible to create those buffers, areas where the hierarchy gets diffused and slowly you can get back? So the idea is, when you have shopping, when you have a place where everybody gathers, is it possible that children, people of different sectors, different income groups can gather? Can they have education there? Can they be learning there? Can the villagers outside, can they join also there? Can they combine together all this? So what it means is, architectural tool is not only doing one single thing, but slowly talking about a larger whole, which eventually makes communities, communities become towns, towns become cities, cities become states. I think if that can be done, then what happens? You start looking at energy. How do you really look at the seasons? How do you look at the scarcities of materials? There could be droughts, there could be floods. So what do you do with them? So children get studies, but they go into kindergarten, but they also have to go to college. You also have to build industries. You have to also look at old cities which are very famous in India. And if you want to look at them, how do you conserve them? How do you improve their central spaces? How do you find the historical building there? And then how do you find that in today's context, you can use them? And I think all these things, have become my baggage. And that baggage is what I do. And in that baggage, I have tried to do buildings. One thing I found was myths. My memory of childhood is those great epics. Epics of our ancient rulers, You have heard about Vedas, you have heard about yogas, yogic sciences, you have heard about all this. But what are those? Actually, they have come from the roots of our uncertainty. We have a statement called the only certainty is uncertainty. Another statement is there is a unity in diversity. So paradox is actually a part and parcel of our life. And I think those things became for me a focus. So as a result, what would be the nature of form? What would be the nature of cluster? What would be the nature of space? What would be the nature of structure? So I visited a lot of ancient temples, ancient cities, and other cities which are like Fatehpur Sikri and others. So I found that they had couple of theories of their own. You can't have everything consistently the same, so you must allow variations. If you have to have variations, then those variations must give you another opportunity and another possibility. That variation then becomes another order. So main structure and substructure, multiple structures and order, all those things became for me very important issues. As a result, what happened? My definition of architecture changed, and myths added into that the kind of support system that I needed to think about. For example, who doesn't want to dream? I think everybody wants to have a house, but he wants to say that my house, I am the king. And I think if he has to be the king, what kind of benefit does he get? So in that case, what one has to try to do is, can we give them opportunity to create open-ended places, give additions, give something else? And I think all those things for me became more important because they actually became more rooted to the climate, more rooted to the habit, gave them greater opportunities, and then they thought that generations can use it. So timelessness became for me another issue. And I found that in that timelessness, I could change, add on, subtract, multiply, and create actually a feeling of ownership. I think the most important thing that we are today, we are in transit. We are using all these mobile phones and everything else. We are tools. But where are our roots? What are we? So can we marry these two together? Can we find this together? Second thing is, we talk of time, but actually which time are we talking of? Whose time are we talking? So all those things for me became very, very different issues, so that I would say, if I want to do a building and if I have a column or if I have something else, can I make it alive so I can adjust something? Can I do something by which I can distract, disconnect, add, subtract? So architecture for me now has become a symphony of things which work together and they play their own music, in which everybody has a chance to play his own tune. So with all this that I have talked about, you must be wondering, what about my buildings? And how do I work? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. In my childhood, when I went to the temples, I found the temples are lasted for centuries. That means, that over time they were only growing. So addition, not only in my own home, my grandfather's house, but addition is one of the essential parts of Indian architecture. But then if you had to add, what do you do? So you use certain structural systems which work. So most of the temples are made of stone, but what is interesting when I went first time into the stone temples was I never found where the addition was. The long corridors were there, but the moment they added, they juxtaposed that corridor by a parallel corridor as if, it's moving further. So there was a transition. And because of the transition and because of expansion, they had little courts. And from those courts, you got only not light, you got ventilation, and you had people to gather together, isolated, in group or in any way you want. So one thing was, when the open-ended structure was done, you got hold of other cosmic forces that they would enter into it, they would add on light, ventilation, but beauty was when the rains came, when the breeze came, you would feel the breeze, even though the structures are mega structure, but they are all in fragments. Second thing was, if you go there and you're bored and you don't know, suddenly you see a column with a horse attached, or a dancer attached, or another statue attached. They were all from mythological stories. And when they were there as a mythological stories, you almost felt that the columns are alive. So the static not only became dynamic, it also went beyond time and it added another dimension in which you were connected, whether you are a young child or you are a grown-up. What does it mean? It means that the moment this happens, you start waiting there and you belong to the column and you start conversing. And I think that whole idea to create architecture as a living being becomes very, very important. And I think this is one of the things that I learned was architecture is a living entity in which you can live, dialogue, add, subtract and give this. Then there are scales, large scale, narrow places, long linear spaces or very, very low. On all were they together and it's very much like the natural trees in a forest. You have a big forest and you have a small forest and you have dry wood and you have trunks. As a result, they had one opportunity which I think was there. Whatever was available was positively used. It was used beyond the ability of what it is. So when the column was there, which was a regular stone, had different formations. So diversity came in and therefore a child or a grown-up, a scholar or an illiterate person, I think they all enjoyed the place. That means, that there is no question of getting it. And the beauty of India is Indian climate. In monsoon is humid, you need breeze. Summer it is very hot and bright, you need diffuse light. And then you find that all these things are connected to your belief system. So your religion, your deities, etc. are located far away. So there large crowds come. You stand in queues and yet you don't feel that you are bored because there is a continuously space. For example, today when we do a mega structure, it is almost one structure and therefore there is nothing else to talk about. Here you find in this structure diversity. So this was one thing that I learned. Other thing that I learned was in small houses, where do you get materials from? So you go from the nearby places and they would have stone, they would have brick walls and they would have wood. Now wooden structures can be made and they can be very, very delicate and you get into something, but you have to animate a house. So house is a representation of a human being. The heart is the inside court. The balcony, which we call a jharukha with a jali, is your eyes. The terrace is part of your head. And the breeze that comes through the courtyard and opening is your body, your soul. Now all these things become closer, and when you put them together, you save the walls, you do parallel things, you use little, whatever is available, you use all of those, and they get a proper scale. So architecture has to also have some scale which can create dialogue. That dialogue has to be very important. If you go to Bhutan, if you go to ancient places in India, you will find innumerable buildings which are all maybe very large, but they are human, they are accessible, and then there are other things that I found was that in the paintings and miniatures and big temples that we have done, which took several centuries, rock-cut temples also, they made exceptions of changing the figures, changing certain structures, completely juxtaposed. Like if there are elephants there in a row, walking in one direction, one elephant would turn the head, or a cow. Suddenly you realize exception is a rule. And therefore you have a chance to discuss and dialogue. So every time we talk of megastructure, we talk of substructure, we talk of a situation where you are located, I think they are not creating problem, but they are actually offering an opportunity for another change, another innovation. And that is what I found. So moment I found this, what I did, in Indore, where I did this housing, the most important thing that I did was I remembered my childhood, I remembered that lady, and then I decided that one day I will give them something by which they will have identity. So when the opportunity came from the government to give economically weaker section only a plinth of 30 square meter with a very small, maybe 30 centimeter high plinth with a water tap, electric connection and a toilet, 30 square meter long, I thought if that is given to them, why don't they have a chance to build their own house? So the moment you empower people, the moment you empower them, there is hope. Those people who have nothing given, they wander and they don't know where to go. This place gets rooting. So one of the lessons for us is, can we give something by which we root people there, give them a hope, give them an aspiration? Today, after 40 years, the plan that I had done, I picked up a lot of things from the villages. I found how life goes on in a cluster, then I found how the women folk and children play and earn money, how they can make little small shops and big shops, how they will have little prayer places, how their streets will be there so that they can also sleep on the streets. They will have that open sleep. So the community was what my impression was, and I tried to do that in Indore, and as a result, it was built in 82. Today there are quite a few people with ground floor, ground and 1 floor, ground plus 2 floors, and some ground plus 3 floors, all built by them. And what they have done? They earned money, they sublet the house, they changed, they educated their children, they have given them some craft, and not only that, but they have found a lot of things which they have done. One thing which I know I have not found much was, I had also said that the windows, the jalis, the grills, the steps could have been done by the cooperatives there. And in that cooperative they would produce, and then they can use how it has happened in Jaisalmer and in other places where stone slabs are available. But even then, variety is there, diversity is there, but most important, identity is there and community life is there. So that is one thing which I found that I did from learning from all these essays, that how do you really create this opportunity and scale and incremental growth by doing this. But other thing was in India that we always not only expand, we have flats of middle income and higher income group. When they build buildings, they grow, but they don't know where to grow. So the first thing is cover the balcony with a grill, add on the terrace, or add little bit, in the margin. But the curse was they were all made for one class of people. Middle income group, low income group, high income group, exclusive one. I thought that this also should be removed and we should do a new kind of typology. So what I tried to do in the Life Insurance Corporation was they came to me with an asked question that we have these three policy holders. One needs 40 square meter, one needs 770 square meter, one needs 1000 square meter, and they can afford that much house. So I said, I will do that, but I won't do independent ghettos. So I found out a way for them that I said, if I put, because I knew the Indian tendency of growth, if I knew the change that is going to happen over time, I also knew that when they become neighbors, they don't change their houses. They don't stay, they want to stay there only. Incidentally, in LIC after 40 years now, only hardly 10% people have changed. So they have become friends, they have become colleagues. So what happened? Once the fellow below on the ground increases, he has encroached the property line, but that has given a terrace to the upper floor. So he says, why can't I work there, and the top one also gets a bedroom. Now, when they get everybody an opportunity, you start negotiating, you change, you feel that you are all connected, and your social, economic, cultural attitude and lifestyle changes. To add all this, I thought way to do is to get common accesses to them. So there is only one staircase going up to 3 floors, the pyramidal building, and the staircase in the middle. That means the poorest fellow is on the top floor, but he enters the same location, same place, parks in the same location on the ground where the rich fellow is living. As a result, today, they have not only become friends, but they also give them a chance to help each other. Even employment happens, connections happen, and life changes. So that was another thing that I found was, even in housing, main structure and substructure, all the theories of light, air, ventilation, space, all that you can do, but add another aspect which we never talk as an architect. As an architect, can we make a social change? Can we create something for the society that there is a greater harmony? Can we really find a way by which we can save time and energy? Other thing that I found was, these villages, when I saw them, they were comprehensive. There was a water storage tank, and that was a seasonal water. So they were talking about self-sustainable villages and towns. So why can't we do self-sustaining settlements, which allows them to not only grow, but then use the new technology which are available. So if we can get the satellite communication, high tools of using things, and we even get smaller proportions, we can make photovoltaic cells, we can change the roof line, we can change the sky, we can give them semi-employed home office. So if we can give them a self-employed home office, we remove or we reduce transport, we reduce travel time, we reduce all the things that we are doing with this mega structure. And if we can avoid those mega structure, reduce them, we can use that kind of thing, use land more effectively, and create something which will be for us a new way of life, using the latest technologies and the primary ways of the attitudes of which we have been sustaining over centuries. And I think that is really something which I think we should do. And I think as an architect, that is the role we have to play. Another aspect which I think I mentioned briefly about myths, and for me, It's a very fascinating thing. Because myth has no limits. Myth can go beyond anything. In fact, from childhood, everybody likes myths. Those Aesop fables and other French and other stories, that we get. So fables are to me one of the basics, which give us a chance to relax, to love, to play game. And I thought that was one thing that I had found, and I was fascinated by creating another kind of world for myself. So Sangath building, which is my studio, I was involved with talking about sustainability, I was talking about recycling of waste, I was talking about climate control, but I was also thinking about how do we really create one's own studio, which becomes for you not only memorable, but which really denies the whole idea of what an office or a studio should be. Should a building look like a building? Should an office function like that office? Or should the building have similar organizations and order things? So to prove that it is not necessary, you have to find out another episode or another imagery. And luckily in the 70s or 60s, I don't know, when I had gone to see the pyramids of Gizeh, I saw there the small studio of Vizavasef, the sculptor. It was done in all sand and mud, maybe sand blocks. Very tiny with walls and a roof like this. And I was quite amazed because he had craft center, he had pottery center, he had a little museum, he was also having carpet being made by children. So he was talking about a place where you learn, you educate, you delight, and you wonder. Next to this pyramid, this looked tiny, but to me that tiny with those walls and with those buttresses and almost diffused with the land, I thought if I can have a place like this, would that not be the ideal? And I wanted to get that offering for myself. So I created Sangath. Sangath means moving together. Second thing is that if you create diverse spaces, you are coming back to the old city imagery, because you are really in narrow, long spaces, then wide spaces and whatnot. The third one is you try to use all the waste products from the sites, that is flooring, then wooden material, then tiles, everything you can, as much as possible, you take recycling of things. Fourth one is ask the fundamental question, should the office look like an office or should it look like a place where there's a paradise in a garden? The most important thing was, if you don't see people and you only see building, a low-rise building and trees under the shade, you wonder where are the people working. So lastly, but most important was the journey. And I think what I tried to do was create a journey of discovery which I told you about the Indian temple, Indian pole, Indian houses, and I thought I will practice that and create these spaces along with water and others which are a cyclical order or climatic control order. They would become part and parcel. And that is really how I did Sangath. But it was not only there, but Sangath was moving together. So that means, can we really share ourselves with the society? Can we share with other colleges and other institutions? So you also need a little amphitheater, you also need a little place, you also need a little garden. So office is no more an office, but it becomes a part and parcel of community. Professional community, social community. So there are places to discuss, to debate, even to teach and to learn. We have even international studio where we invite people and we participate and we make a program in which the student is supposed to go to the slums and really study. So the idea is the role of an architect goes beyond our normal practice, but it gets into not only the professional disciplines, but also it gets into participatory process. And I think Sangath is a participatory place. It is a place where we do research, we do studies in lifestyle and find out how do we create sustainable life, qualitative life, including music and theatre and everything else. So this is Sangath which I did. The other building that I was trying to do then was, incidentally, when I did this, whole lot of people refused to come. But finally it has become for them a place. Because it is unusual, it is different, it is joyous. The other thing that I tried to do was, are there rules through which we construct architecture and a building, or are there experiences through which we look at space, structure, form, light, ventilation or construction, etc. And that was the time when I had the chance to work with my friend Maqbul Fida Hussain, artist, one of the very senior, most known artists in the country. He asked me one question. He says, your all buildings are there, but can you give me something which really we can memorable, we can challenge? And I think it was a challenge to me and him. And so it was done. The whole idea was then, should we really make experiential architecture using new technology, which was the ferrocement, create experiences which are meandering, go into a building which is partly in semi-basement, and you walk through the place in which your structure is organically done, but not necessarily engineering-wise saying it is like this. So we used ferrocement, and we found, my engineer told me that bubbles, if you put them together, they join, and when they join, they burst, but until the curvilinear forms merge together, and that is really how ferrocement was used. And we had to do this not by local, regular craftsmen, but we got hold of the tribal people, and we designed the structure on a computer. So we tried to combine exactly opposite situations, unknown so far, but discovering things. And then on site we had to modulate, and today it has become one of the wonderful places for children to play. The outside space, evening people come. There is a restaurant where young students come from the university and other places. Children go on the domes. And finally, to highlight this, I thought I should make a myth, write a myth, so that each object takes another meaning. And that meaning came from an old Indian legend of Pithora Baba, in which in the villages, when they build a building, when they make walls, but the last wall has to be done, then they would have a ritual of few days in which they would sing and dance and then draw on the wall, and then there will be, in their old tradition, they would sacrifice. But when the whole ceremony is done, they think now things have come alive. So the whole idea to me was, when we do buildings, when we construct things, when we find our own ways, as I was mentioning earlier, my question is architecture alive, or is architecture only static, silent and aloof, or it is an extension of our family? And not only that, but all its organs, windows, skin, body, limbs, is it really telling us another story about the functions of those, similar to what we are going to do in the building? And I think this is something which I tried to do. And I think, to me, therefore, in the end, architecture is an extension of life. Architecture is really what nature does to the landscape, to the life of people over time, how it evolves, how it merges, how it integrates, and how it becomes quiet, beautiful, but almost eternal. As if, that it has given us a sense of being spiritual. Thank you.
Kada nas interesira i kroz svoju vlastitu praksu, nekako je upravo dodirnuto kroz Došijev iskaz, dakle pitanje održivosti, pitanje odnosa prema klimatskim zadatostima, pitanje odnosa prema kulturnom kontekstu i nasljeđu, pitanje osjetljivosti prema društvenoj stvarnosti, prema životnim stilovima, prema životnim procesima, sve nekako uključeno u njegovu arhitekturu i pogotovo u način na koji on razmišlja o arhitekturi, jer mislim da je to fundamentalno, može čak i važnije od same izgrađene arhitekture. I na kraju ono ključno pitanje koje se pojavljuje negdje, čini mi se u sredini predavanja, a to je možemo li mi kao arhitekti utjecati na transformaciju i na boljitak društva. Mislim da je Doshi odista pokazao da je to i u indijskom vrlo bremenitom kontekstu moguće. Čini mi se da mi možda još ovdje u Hrvatskoj i u ovim našim prostorima nismo dovoljno siromašni kao u Indiji, pa da bismo zbilja mogli pokrenuti neke procese, takve transformacije, fundamentalne transformacije kao što je to on uspio u svojim projektima, dakle ovo povezivanje različitih društvenih skupina ili uspostavljanje jasne veze između modernizma i tradicijskih ili povijesnih prostornih i arhitektonskih oblika. Hvala Došiju što nam je poslao ovo predavanje.